As the thunder of combat echoed across the battlefields of Europe, the latter parts of 1943 marked a significant turning point for the Wehrmacht as it grappled with the burgeoning menace of Soviet armor. The Tiger I, a tank that had become synonymous with German military might, was lauded for its formidable armor and firepower. German tank crews, indoctrinated in the lore of their machines, found a kind of solace in the solidity of the vehicle. However, as the months wore on, the realities of mechanical failures began to overshadow the initial praise, forcing them to adapt on the fly. While the Tiger's armor was impervious to the anti-tank weaponry of early war Soviet forces, its complex engineering, particularly the gearbox, proved to be the Achilles heel of this titan on the battlefield. On the Eastern Front, specifically during the Battle for Kursk in the summer of 1943, the operational limitations of the Tiger I began to surface dramatically. Tank crews who previously looked upon their vehicles with pride soon became embroiled in a war not just against enemy soldiers, but against their own machine's mechanical frailties. The Tiger's gearbox, an intricate assembly comprised of multiple gears and hydraulic components, was notorious among mechanics. In the unforgiving reality of warfare, this complicated piece of engineering would fail under the strenuous demands of mobility, often proving notorious for its unreliability. As German forces advanced, many Tiger crews reported having to abandon their tanks after mere kilometers of travel due to gearbox malfunctions, particularly during critical operations that required rapid maneuvering and sustained engagement with enemy forces. On the surface, the robustness of the Tiger I's armor appeared to justify its contribution to the German war effort. The 100mm frontal armor could withstand hits from virtually every Soviet anti-tank gun up to and including the 76mm ZIS-3 field gun. However, the success of a tank extends beyond mere impenetrability. Reliability, mobility, and crew efficiency are crucial components in the equation of battlefield dominance. Sustained operations over the expansive terrains of Eastern Europe required logistical precision that the Tiger's design often undermined. The weight of the Tiger I, surpassing 54 tons, necessitated substantial infrastructure, disproportionate to its production efforts compared with lighter, more versatile designs. This lack of logistical foresight became a glaring issue as swathes of these tanks became immobile in frontline positions, easy targets for advancing infantry or even enemy aircraft. The mechanical failures experienced by the Tiger crews were grim reminders of the war's brutal mathematics. An excellent weapon could be rendered useless when not maintained properly or subject to operational strain. Crews often lacked sufficient parts or technical personnel needed to repair such sophisticated machines, particularly in the heat of battle. Following the initial success in North Africa and parts of France, the rapid deployment of the Tiger to the Eastern Front highlighted other shortcomings in German logistics. The expectation to maintain operational tempo placed great strain on supply chains that were already under duress. The distance between repair facilities and the front lines often created a logistical gap, exacerbating the issue of broken-down tanks. With every mechanical failure, there was not just a loss of material. There was an irreplaceable toll on morale. Tank commanders, who bore the weight of expectations from higher command, often faced dire consequences for mechanical breakdowns. To add to the psychological strain, the nature of tank warfare is intensely personal. Unlike aircraft or artillery, which operate at a distance, a tank crew is enveloped in a singular fighting vehicle, relying on one another for survival. When a gearbox failed, it wasn't just a hunk of machinery left behind. It was a shared loss that shattered camaraderie and inflicted emotional scars. The camaraderie built through the harrowing experiences of combat was often put to the ultimate test in moments of failure. As Germany pushed further into Soviet territory, engagement with specially adapted enemy tanks like the T-34 necessitated tactical evolutions. German tank commanders adopted strategies that entailed ambushing T-34s as they rushed into battle, targeting the lower hull where their armor was weakest. Using the Tiger's long-range 88mm gun, the crews engaged at a distance, maximizing their vehicle's strengths while mitigating exposure to counterattacks. However, crew training was another challenge. The The German military had invested heavily in mechanized warfare theory and tank gunnery, yet the reality of urban combat in cities like Stalingrad and later into Kursk required new strategies. Urban terrain heavily favored the maneuverability of lighter Soviet tanks, further deteriorating the Tiger crew's confidence as they faced embedded enemies peppering them from every direction. Sustained employment of such tactics often proved effective, but as the war dragged on, the growing number of Soviet tank innovations began to erode the advantages of the German armor. The relentless Soviet response often involved overwhelming numbers, giving rise to combat encounters where individual tank performance faltered against sheer volume. German commanders were compelled to reconsider their deployment strategies, leaning towards concentration of forces to maximize the impact of their heavier tanks. These adjustments resulted in savage battles, but the early successes began to dwindle, and so did the trust in the mighty Tiger Flaw. Ultimately, the Nazi offensive into the east stumbled as the Eastern Front's brutal conditions and the increasing capabilities of the Red Army began to unravel the Wehrmacht's advances. Incidences of breakdown, compounded by undersupplied mechanics and harsh winters, illustrated the crumbling facade of operational supremacy. The first-hand accounts of tank crews highlighted a dual reality. They were warriors championing a dominant piece of military hardware, yet they were also soldiers grappling with human limits beset by mechanical failures and logistical failures. As victories dwindled, the psychological weight of battle transformed into bitter disappointment, encapsulating the very essence of warfare, an indelible fusion of technology and the human experience. The fabled Tiger, once a beacon of pride and fear, now stood as a testament to the pitfalls of engineering marvels, when not grounded in the real-world demands of logistics and operational needs. The stories of German tank crews, culminating in triumphant moments interspersed with mechanical failures, and the harrowing specter of war, painted a comprehensive portrait. The tales of human perseverance amidst the trials faced by a broken gearbox and impossible terrains would echo through history, engaging future generations with the complexities of war where man and machine intertwine amid the chaos of battle. As the war dragged deeper into the 1940s, the sheer audacity of German military innovations began to collide with an evolving battlefield landscape. The introduction of the Tiger I tank, with its formidable 88mm gun and near-impenetrable armor, represented a peak in German engineering and tactical thought. In theory, this behemoth was meant to suppress all that stood against it, establishing a new paradigm of tank warfare. However, the technical brilliance it embodied came at a grave cost. The initial praises sung by the tank crews of its unmatched armor turned into hushed whispers of frustration as mechanical flaws began to rear their heads on the unforgiving Eastern Front. Among the myriad challenges facing the German Wehrmacht was the rigidly conservative approach to mobility that had characterized German armored doctrine. While speed and surprise had previously been pivotal in securing rapid advances, the terrain of the Soviet Union presented insurmountable obstacles. Bridges crumbled, roads disintegrated into mud, and frostbite conditions hampered the mechanical reliability of tanks that were already burdened by issues stemming from design. The Tiger I's gearbox, which many crews initially lauded, turned into a liability. It regularly failed under the duress of aggressive maneuvers or prolonged combat. On numerous occasions, fleets of these titanic machines, intended to break through enemy lines, found themselves incapacitated after a mere 50 kilometers. Often stranded in hostile territory, awaiting repairs that seemed perpetually just over the next horizon. The logistical nightmares faced by German commanders contributed directly to the perilous situation in which their tank crews often found themselves. Supply lines stretched thin, frayed by the harsh winter and relentless Soviet counteroffensives, leading to dwindling resources and insufficient maintenance capabilities. The famed blitzkrieg tactics, which emphasized speed and surprise, faltered within the brutal realities of winter warfare. Commanders had to strike a balance between hastily repairing damaged tanks and sustaining momentum against an increasingly resilient enemy. The estimated tank operation downtime skyrocketed as supply shortages prevented timely and adequate repair. Rather than dominating the battlefield, the once feared Tiger the Freund often became an emblem of German overreach that amplified the despair within its ranks. As crews grappled with their limitations amid the vast snowy expanses of the Soviet front, the human aspect of warfare began to eclipse the technical prowess of their machinery. The psychological toll on tank crews was profound. Each failure of their high-tech machines served as a bitter reminder of the uncertain conflict they were embroiled in. An anonymous gunner once recounted, "It wasn't just about firing shells or taking out tanks. The fear of never knowing whether your tank would seize up in the middle of battle, that gnawed at you." The psychological burden of a malfunctioning tank during critical moments increasingly fostered a sense of fatalism amongst the crews. Man had battled the machine, and on numerous occasions, the ticking time bomb of reliability led men to question their survival. Compounded by heavy losses, the evolving battlefield dynamics between the German and Soviet forces showcased the stark contrast in approaches to tank warfare. The Soviets, through their experiences after the initial setbacks, innovated aggressively in armored tactics and deployment. The emergence of the T-34, with its sloped armor designed to improve bounce-off potential, and its relatively agile delivery, posed a substantial threat to the previously invincible German machines. The Soviet doctrine shifted toward massed formations, enabling the Red Army to leverage their numerical superiority effectively. The resulting encounters became less about individual machine superiority and more about attrition and morale. German commanders wrestled with the idea that what was once an advantage had transformed into a critical vulnerability. The stark reality of this attritional warfare further fueled resentment among the Wehrmacht tankers. As the summer of 1943 ushered in Operation Citadel, the final German offensive in the east, the limping tanks crept toward the encroaching Soviets in a desperate bid to shift the balance back in their favor. Yet, the battlefield had changed drastically. Incidents of Tiger tanks becoming immobilized, bogged down, or breaking down amidst their last charges culminated in catastrophic failures that would ultimately lead to staggering losses. A mere echo of their former might, the quiet whir of machinations disintegrating into silence amid the chaos, marked a dire shift in the German narrative. The relentless advance of the Russian soldiers who adapted and learned began to reveal many cracks in the once carefully crafted image of invincibility. Moreover, the human elements of warfare permeated the ranks, altering the traditional hierarchical command structures. As the situation worsened, reliance shifted from central command edicts toward the on-ground insights of junior officers and enlisted men. Individual tank commanders became pivotal in relaying crucial intelligence about effective strategies and enemy movements. This shift led to a more adaptive, albeit chaotic, command structure, one defined by urgency rather than longevity. In these frantic moments, the boundaries between strategy and improvisation blurred, often leading to tactical victories scored at great losses. The fabled armored beasts that had once surged fear into enemy hearts were slowly reduced to rusting hulks on the frozen steppes, remnants of a strategy that had outstripped logistical capacity and human endurance. The ignominious fate of these tanks became a metaphor for Germany's broader military malaise as the war reached its pivotal turning points across Europe. It was not merely the loss of armored machines or battle plans that unfolded in the frozen grounds of the Eastern Front, but rather the slow unraveling of the German military ethos that had purportedly defined their identity. In retrospect, the tales of the Tiger I and its crews not only reflect a unique snapshot of military technology clashing against austere realities, but also underscore a fundamental truth about war itself. It is an amalgamation of human struggle intertwined with mechanical failure, a harrowing interplay that leaves an indelible mark upon the psyche of those who dare to wage it. As we further explore the narratives of these combatants and delve into the inherent lessons suffusing their stories, it becomes clear that the impacts of these encounters, both mechanical and human, would reverberate through history, illuminating the complexities of warfare that continue to fascinate and challenge our understanding of conflict today. As we conclude this exploration of tank warfare's intertwining complexity, we invite you to delve deeper into the lessons of history. Subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, let us unravel the stories that shaped our world, igniting dialogues about resilience amid adversity, where humanity grapples with the profound lessons of war. As the German military rolled forward into the Eastern Front, a careful orchestration of strategy intended to secure rapid victories soon revealed its frayed edges. The Tiger I tank, heralded as the apex of armored warfare technology, with its formidable 88mm gun and unrivaled armor, initially appeared to be the definitive solution to the challenges posed by the Soviet T-34. Its introduction during the Battle of Kursk in 1943 showcased a moment of tactical evolution, as commanders anticipated the Tiger's heavy firepower to dominate the battlefield. However, as the war progressed, the reality of tank warfare starkly contrasted with the propaganda that glorified these armored giants. The mechanical ingenuity of the Tiger would soon clash with the relentless Russian winter and the grim realities of logistical support. From the inception of the Tiger I, it was a symbol of German engineering prowess, embodying a doctrine that emphasized firepower, armor, and mobility. Despite its robust design, the vast improvements over previous models came with complications that often manifested in the form of mechanical unreliability. A crew, enthusiastic about the capabilities of their machine, quickly found their optimism tempered by harrowing realities. The gearbox, a critical component of any tank, was particularly prone to failure, and the combat experience had illustrated this systemic flaw. As crews took their Tigers into combat, the expectation was set high. Nevertheless, it was not uncommon for these crews to experience mechanical failures after only 50 kilometers, leading to a severe crisis of confidence. This situation not only stymied combat effectiveness, but also exposed a broader fissure within the German command structure. Commanders on the ground increasingly found themselves grappling with a schism: the valorization of the Tiger's potential versus the pragmatic limitations dictated by its design. Exacerbating this technological quandary was the persistent issue of supply lines, a crucial element of any military campaign. Despite the advances in mechanized warfare, logistical support had not evolved at a similar pace. As Tiger crews advanced into Soviet territory, they frequently found themselves without adequate fuel or replacement parts, rendering their formidable machines vulnerable. A single breakdown could result in a tank being permanently abandoned, incapable of advancing and contributing to the war effort. Compounding this frustration was the weather. The biting cold of the Russian winter could freeze lubricants, causing engines to seize and gears to grind to a halt. The harsh climate turned battlefields into frozen graveyards for immobilized tanks, transforming once potential victories into dismal sites of abandonment. The human element of this conflict fell heavily upon the tank crews. Soldiers trained for months for the adrenaline-fueled chaos of armored warfare soon found themselves marred by disillusionment as unavoidable failures mounted. This not only affected morale within crews, but also took a toll on their collective psyche. The harsh reality of combat, juxtaposed against the image of the Tiger I as an invincible force, bred resentment. Crews were tasked with maintaining their machines under trying conditions, their training insufficient for the exceptionally challenging scenarios they faced. Field mechanics reported difficulties in performing repairs on damaged gearboxes that had made the Tigers a paragon of strength, ultimately revealing vulnerabilities that could turn the tide of warfare. The urgency that once paved the way for aggressive offensives became overshadowed by despair, as repairs and maintenance stretched beyond manageable limits in adverse conditions. As the war made its turn toward defeat for Germany, the resilience of tank crews and their ability to adapt became increasingly crucial. Accumulated battle experience introduced a range of improvised techniques and collaborative efforts to address mechanical shortfalls. Engineers and crew members shared knowledge and skills, creating a network of problem solvers motivated by survival, a harsh yet noble pursuit born from a complex interplay of need and ingenuity. Over time, adaptations in driving methods, defensive tactics, and usage of terrain emerged. Crews became adept at maneuvering their Tigers in a manner that minimized exposure to enemy fire, while maximizing their effective range. The focus concentrated on familiarizing themselves with the choreography of their immediate environment, heightening the awareness of potential ambushes. Tactically, German commanders sought to leverage the strengths of the Tiger I by employing combined arms strategies that incorporated infantry and air support. However, the reliance on the tank's performance intertwined with mechanical vulnerabilities was becoming increasingly untenable, the weight of expectations heavy upon each advance. Some units reported initial success when unleashing the brutal firepower of their Tigers in concert with artillery barrages, carving pathways through enemy defenses. Tactical innovations were necessary, but these efforts were often hampered by the broader realities of warfare. Intelligence failures, logistical bottlenecks, and the sheer scale of Soviet counteroffensives. The vast numerical superiority of the Red Army began to erode the mythos surrounding the Tiger, resulting in heavy losses and mounting despair. Ultimately, the fate of the Tiger became a somber narrative not just of technology, but of human tenacity in the face of overwhelming adversity. The relentless march of the Eastern Front illuminated the limits of mechanical advancement. The armor that once inspired awe in allies and fear in enemies became corroded not merely by Russian winter and battle, but also by the inexorable march of time and conflict, revealing a poignant truth that the human spirit, when intertwined with the frustrations and failures of machinery, can illuminate the darker corners of warfare. As lauded as it was for its brute strength, the legacy of the Tiger I and the sacred bond formed within its confined turret always pointed to the struggle that lay within its very core. A fight not solely against adversaries, but against the constraints of engineering, harsh realities, and the burdens borne by those damned to carry the weight of history in their blood. Through the lens of these crews, each man accepted the core component of risk, as they every day inched towards an uncertain future, fraught with fear and hardship, but driven by an indomitable will to persist. They danced with the dragons of a mechanized warfare that ultimately defined their generation and etched their humanity onto the storied tablets of history. The tale of the Tiger stands not only as a monument to warfare technology, but as an indelible exploration of the human condition amidst the specter of machinery gone awry. As the fateful summer of 1943 unfolded on the Eastern Front, the German military command found itself in a precarious quagmire. Despite the heavy investment in advanced armor technology, particularly the formidable Tiger I tank, operational effectiveness was dictated by a complex web of logistics, terrain, and human resource management, often resulting in outcomes that belied the promise of engineering superiority. The day-to-day reality for the Tiger crews was starkly contrasted with the hype surrounding their armored behemoths. When initially rolled into action, the Tigers were celebrated as the pinnacle of tank design. Their sloped armor could withstand direct hits, while their powerful 88mm guns could obliterate enemy fortifications at considerable distances. However, this technological edge was not immune to the brutal arithmetic of war, which increasingly dictated the parameters of engagement. For every enemy tank taken out by a skilled Tiger crew, multiple variables conspired against them. Soviet military doctrine emphasized mass. The Red Army's vast numerical strength, bolstered by a relentless stream of reinforcements and a nearly inexhaustible supply of T-34s and KV-1s, transformed the battlefield into a game of attrition. Commanders on the German side often found themselves reeling in the wake of devastating Soviet counteroffensives designed to exploit the visible cracks in the Wehrmacht's operations. The encirclement of German forces, coupled with increased partisanship within occupied territories, created a logistical nightmare that rippled throughout the entire command structure, further straining an already overextended supply chain. The tactical employment of the Tiger I was often hampered by these logistical inconsistencies. Although a commander could issue orders for a strike that capitalized on the tank's strengths, it became increasingly difficult to ensure that the necessary fuel, ammunition, and spare parts would be available when and where needed. The notorious failure of the Tiger's complex gearbox, a component essential for both mobility and operational readiness, exemplified the inherent challenges of sustaining warfare. Although the tank's armor could withstand considerable punishment, its transmission often faltered after just 50 kilometers of intense combat, leaving crews stranded in hostile territory with limited recourse. Engaging the enemy became a perilous exercise in futility, as the fear of mechanical failure loomed as ominously as the threat of Soviet fire. Amidst these challenges, the living conditions for the Tiger crews further exacerbated their plight. The confined space within the tank turret, coupled with sweltering temperatures and poor ventilation, made for an inhospitable working environment. Each man was often forced to accept the reality that survival hinged not only on their combat acumen, but also on the sheer ingenuity required to operate and maintain their sophisticated machines. The high-stress environment prompted a unique camaraderie, a mix of friendship and shared suffering forged between men who collectively endured the trials of war, each carrying the weight of their shared burden through the cacophony of battle. They spoke in hushed tones of dreams, families left behind, and fleeting moments of solace amid the chaos. Yet, all understood that the Tiger they adored was as much a constraint as it was a weapon. While the performance of the Tiger has been romanticized in retrospect, the reality of combat was littered with instances of flawed tactics and breakdowns in command. Higher echelons of the Wehrmacht often interfered with frontline strategies, insisting on grandiose plans that ill-fitted the fluidity of battle. Commanders on the ground frequently contended with last-minute adjustments based on outdated intelligence reports, which placed their crews in precarious positions as the tides of battle shifted. Briefings and orders from far-off command centers frequently lacked the crucial intelligence required for sound decision-making, resulting in overly ambitious objectives that led to significant operational failures. The consequences of such blunders were tragic and profound. As Tiger crews advanced into heavily fortified Soviet positions, they often found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The celebrated firepower of the Tiger, which had initially instilled confidence, soon began to feel like a tempting lure leading soldiers to peril. In the thick of battle, the anticipated strike would dissolve into chaos as Soviet T-34s, with their superior numbers and flexible tactics, flanked and engaged from the cover provided by the dense ruins and wooded terrain. The cries of crew members echoed across the ravaged landscape as commanders desperately called for support that rarely seemed to arrive on time. The turning point came during the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, where a massive Soviet counteroffensive fundamentally redefined the engagement of armor on the Eastern Front. Here, the myth of invincibility surrounding the Tiger I tank began to crumble. Bogged down in the mud of a protracted attritional battle, the reliance on heavy machinery was laid bare, as the tank's weight became a liability rather than a boon, leading to immobilization on treacherous terrain. While these tanks rolled into battle with the confidence of superiority, the combination of mechanical failures and inefficient tactical deployments unleashed staggering losses among Tiger crews. With fierce Soviet resistance, front lines were peppered with the smoking wreckage of both German ambition and costly miscalculations. The emotional toll on the tank crews was both immediate and lingering. Each battle etched deeper scars into their psyche, creating a complicated tapestry of resilience and despair. The weight of loss, punctuated by witnessing the disintegration of their comrades amidst fiery explosions, turned even the most stoic among them into restless specters. Dreams of glory in their armored colossi were replaced with chilling reminders of the fragility of life and the brutal reality of impending death lurking in the trenches. As the roar of the Tigers faded into the grim echoes of the battlefield, the unyielding grip of war gripped their hearts, marking every man with memories indelibly inked into their beings. The tale of Tiger I crews, thus, pivots on the intersection of human resolve and the relentless decline of mechanical dominance, revealing an intricate dance of honor tangled in the frustrations of harsh realities. Virtue diminished in the shadows cast by the metal giants they were entrusted to command, culminating in a narrative shaped not only by the weaponry they wielded, but by the tumultuous landscapes forged in the fires of war. As the months wore on, it became painfully clear that even the most heralded technology could not eclipse the human experience. Wounded, weary, but relentlessly defiant against a tide of overwhelming odds. Such was the poignant complexity of war, where machines of might met the indelible strength of the human spirit, hurling them within a vortex of valor and despair that would forever alter the course of history. As the battle raged on the Eastern Front, the German forces, equipped with their formidable Tiger I tanks, faced an array of challenges that would further unveil the limitations of their armored might. The initial psychological impact of the Tiger's introduction to frontline combat created an exaggerated aura of invincibility among the German troops. Commanders, fueled by the successful campaigns in the West, eagerly deployed these heavy tanks to exploit vulnerabilities in the Soviet defenses, assuming that their heavy armor and powerful 88mm gun would turn the tide decisively in favor of the Axis powers. However, as they were soon to discover, the stark realities of the Russian landscape presented both an unprecedented tactical challenge and a deadly theater of attrition. One of the most pressing concerns was the severe mechanical failures that plagued the Tiger tanks, stemming largely from their intricate design and heavy components. The gearbox, a crucial element for mobility and maneuverability, was often the first to succumb to the grueling demands of combat. Crews quickly learned that the Tiger's design, while revolutionary, was not adequately adapted for the harsh battlefield conditions that characterized the Eastern Front. Operational protocols mandated rigorous maintenance and logistical support. However, the rapid advancement of Soviet forces often rendered supply lines unreliable and overstretched. The initial 50 kilometers of battle became a metaphorical and literal crucible for crews, as the once celebrated armor failed to deliver the promised advantage in engagement. Tactically, the deployment of the Tiger I was both innovative and flawed. The German command adopted a philosophy of shock and awe, sending in the Tigers to pierce the Soviet lines with an overwhelming display of firepower. Crews were instructed to focus on engaging enemy tanks directly, often at a distance that minimized the chances of return fire from flanking infantry, which could exploit the Tiger's blind spots. Yet this doctrine disregarded the Soviet adaptation to tank warfare. Acknowledging the destructive capabilities of the Tiger, Soviet commanders countered with their own strategies, employing tactics of massed anti-tank gun positions and coordinated air support, utilizing the effectiveness of the T-34 tank, which, although less armored, excelled in maneuverability and often exploited the cumbersome movement of the German tanks. As the months progressed into the bitter winter of 1943, prolonged engagements with the Red Army revealed the vulnerability of the German armor in the face of a tenacious adversary. Increasingly, Soviet tactics featured ambushes, often utilizing the terrain to their advantage, setting traps in wooded areas, and leveraging the snow-covered landscape for concealment. The once feared Tiger, in all its metallic glory, became susceptible to attacks from well-placed anti-tank guns and the swarm of determined Soviet infantry armed with anti-tank rifles and grenades. The psychological deployment of intimidation that the Tigers instilled in the beginning turned to frustration as the realization of their limitations set in for the German crews. Each engagement etched new scars on the already tattered morale of the Tiger crews. Intense combat not only pitted them against enemy tanks and artillery, but also forced them to confront the gnawing uncertainties of survival. With the steady decline in the reliability of their machines, the initial fervor of combat devolved into an anguished cycle of risk assessment and retreat. What was supposed to be the vanguard of a sweeping German advance turned into a desperate struggle for survival, as battle-hardened Soviet troops learned to exploit every flaw in tactics and machinery. Reports of solitary Tigers being lost to ambush and rail-thin supply lines grew commonplace, bringing with them a bitter taste of loss and defeat. Each missing tank felt like a wound, and each wounded crew member served as a haunting reminder of the grim reality that lay ahead. The impact on crews transcended physical hardships. The psychological burden of death and destruction pervaded their thoughts, transforming battlefields into graveyards of ambition. The remnants of their once formidable tank formations became a poignant symbol of human ambition, overcome by the stark grimness of war. As officers struggled to inspire their men amidst dwindling resources and battlefield losses, the disconnect between the High Command's strategic optimism and the brutal reality faced on the front lines became glaringly evident. Each transmission ordered the crews to hold the line or regain lost territory, yet for many, abandoned dreams of glory morphed into a fight for mere survival. The deteriorating conditions of the Eastern Front took a toll on the human element of warfare. As the brutal winter froze the ground beneath them, tank crews faced not just mechanical disillusionment, but also the despair of isolation. With lack of proper winter clothing and supplies, they braved the relentless cold in creaking metal boxes, yearning for warmth as much as victory. Their tents and sleeping arrangements were flimsy at best, offering scant protection from the biting winds that howled through the Russian steppes. They lived in a constant state of alertness, knowing the haunting specters of night could bring Soviet tanks, artillery barrages, or worse, moral collapse as comrades fell victim to cold, starvation, and unyielding combat. The enemy within began to surface as the psychological strain intensified. Members of Tiger crews wrote letters filled with anguish, despair, and yearning for home, only to see their hopes crushed as battles unfolded with a cruel swiftness. Nightmares of comrades' faces burned into their memories, punctuated by the chilling sounds of metal against flesh and the acrid smoke of burning machinery. Even in victory, they tasted defeat as the cost grew unbearable. Each advance and every inch gained on the battlefield came at a staggering price, often resulting in enormous losses that outweighed any fleeting sense of success. Thus, the saga of the Tiger Y communication becomes one of war's profound complexities, where the sheer firepower of one of the world's most advanced tanks collided headlong with the inexorable force of human tenacity and suffering. The intertwined fate of the machine and its operators illustrates a grim reality. Technological superiority does not guarantee victory, particularly against a resilient adversary unwilling to surrender. Weeks turned into months, and as the war persisted, it became evident that the Tigers, though celebrated on paper, were mere pawns in a much larger game whose outcome would be decided not just by superior machinery, but by the very endurance of the human spirit in the face of insurmountable odds. As this harrowing chapter in military history unfolds, it beckons for deeper examination. Future discussions may delve further into the ramifications of mechanized warfare, the psychological toll of combat upon soldiers, and the tragic irony of machinery designed for victory ultimately ensnaring the very men it was meant to protect. Such explorations serve not only as an acknowledgement of past lessons, but also as a solemn reminder of the fragile balance between human ambition and the stark realities of war. For those who seek further understanding, we invite them to subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives and welcome suggestions for future themes to explore in the vast and intricate tapestry of history defined by conflict. The saga of the Tiger I tank, a titanic beast of steel and fire, was not merely an account of its mechanical prowess. Rather, it was a narrative suffused with the indelible mark of human experience. As troops praised the formidable armor and firepower that characterized the Tiger, their faces often masked the anxieties of impending combat. These soldiers, the tank crews entrenched in a relentless grind of warfare on the Eastern Front, hoped fervently for the titanic capabilities the tank purported to deliver. However, what lay behind that heavy steel shell was a tangle of logistical nightmares that often betrayed the ambitions of its designers. One of the most significant complications faced by the Tiger crews was the gearbox, which proved a critical weakness in a formidable machine. Initially celebrated for its protective capabilities, the Tiger's armor was meticulously engineered to withstand direct hits from anti-tank artillery. The sophisticated combination of face-hardened steel and sloped design angled incoming rounds to increase the chances of deflection. Yet for every advance the Tiger made into enemy positions, there lurked an ever-present threat of mechanical failure, particularly from the transmission system that was often labeled underwhelming given the tank's weight. Crews were trained in the intricacies of their machines, yet the burden of constant maintenance and the intoxication of battle led many to overlook these vulnerabilities. Commanders would often face harrowing decisions concerning the deployment of their armored assets. The ambitious Soviet counteroffensives during the winter of 1941 and 1942 by the Red Army underscored the need for logistical excellence. Soviet tactics featured encirclement and overwhelming numbers, aimed directly at exploiting the German forces' weaknesses. Well equipped with mobility and the ability to sustain long supply lines, Soviet tanks would often engage the Tiger in ambushes designed to maximize their effectiveness in mobility and firepower. On the battlefield, the chaos was palpable. The whirring of mechanical components, the acrid odor of burning fuel, and the cries of men as metal met flesh formed a stark tableau of war. The sheer weight of the Tiger, clocking in at approximately 54 tons, would become both a boon and a bane. Crewed by a team of 5, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, these men operated in an environment where survival was measured in seconds. With a maximum speed of 38 km/h on roads and a significantly reduced number in rough terrains, the tank's mobility vacillated under the strain of combat. Despite initial successes that saw the Tiger I excel, the overcomplicated nature of its design began to manifest in diminishing returns. The gearbox, already facing strain under combat conditions, would often fail, leading to a tank that could be an unstoppable juggernaut one moment, but rendered useless the next. The degradation of mechanical integrity was especially evident during the defense of Kursk in July 1943, where German forces faced a monumental Soviet offensive dubbed Operation Citadel. The landscape was transformed into a killing field, with minimal room for flanking maneuvers. Here, the Soviet strategy of attrition relied on massed artillery fire and coordinated tank offensives that constantly exploited any German missteps. In these chaotic engagements, the psychological state of the Tiger crews spiraled toward tension-filled despair, filled with nightmarish scenarios. Soldiers delivered reports of immobilized tanks being overwhelmed by the sheer number of Soviet T-34s, whose practicality of design began to reveal the frailties in their German counterpart. The loss of mobility not only rendered strategic positions untenable, but also stripped these crews of a crucial sense of security on the battlefield. A single mechanical failure during those critical moments could lead to encirclement, forcing them out of the tank into a battleground ablaze with chaos. Each crewman was acutely aware that only moments of hesitation could spell the difference between life and death, deepening the mental toll of the warfare around them. The aftermath of such engagements showcased the dark underbelly of mechanized warfare. Tigers, caught in the throes of a losing battle, became stationary targets under fire. What had once stood as ironclad proof of the Axis war effort turned into wreckage littering the fields. The loss of equipment was one thing, but the loss of comrades, and the camaraderie that nurtured these young men, weighed heavier. Each tank that succumbed to mechanical failure or enemy fire was not just a vehicle but a vessel imbued with the dreams, fears, and sacrifices of those who operated it. In these climactic moments, the real tragedy lay in that separation. Men disconnected from their machines, stripped bare of their chosen identities as warriors. The famous insistence on the effectiveness of the German Tiger morphing into unfulfilled promises painted a somber picture of a society caught in the throes of warfare. Communiques became infused with an air of pessimism, dreading the objective reports from battlefronts where technology once promised dominance. The tales emerging from the Eastern Front reveal much more than tactical maneuvers. They reflect the struggles of humanity caught against the unyielding specter of wartime machinery, drawing upon the capacity for hope and despair that compasses the human condition. Historical analysis reveals the military doctrine that birthed the Tiger was one undeniably laced with hubris. The fascinations with brandishing unstoppable machines led command not only to rely on their tangible merits, but also enticed them into a detrimental underestimation of their enemies. As the tides of war shifted, it was the Soviet tactics, combined with sheer tenacity and inexhaustible willpower, that revealed the very limitations of even the most storied armored behemoths. This conflict embodied not only the juxtaposition of technology against human fortitude, but further gleanings pointed toward the harrowing realization that war is, at its very core, an unforgiving confrontation of wills, one that demanded not just technological supremacy, but an unwavering resilience rooted deep within the very soul of soldiers tasked with navigating the horrors of hellish landscapes. Thus, the tale of the Tiger I serves as both a celebration of military innovation and a poignant meditation on the constraints of technology, highlighting that the rushing ahead towards mechanical superiority can sometimes become a mirage, obscuring the essential truths of human courage amidst the chaos of warfare. In acknowledging the foibles of these titanic machines, we are called to remember the sacrifices of those men whose stories are often lost in the annals of military advancements, forever intertwined in a grim testament of the cost of war. As the sun rose over the war-torn landscapes of the Eastern Front in 1943, it illuminated a grueling battlefield where remnants of hope clashed audaciously with despair. Within this volatile theater, the formidable German Tiger I tank was celebrated as a technological marvel, boasting an impressive 100mm frontal armor capable of withstanding enemy fire and a powerful 88mm gun that could pierce the most fortified enemy defenses. However, the stark reality of its operational limitations began to whistle through the cannon smoke, echoing in the war's cacophony, encapsulated in an often-quoted adage among tank crews: "Armor is nothing without mobility." What the German Wehrmacht failed to grasp at this juncture was that while advanced technology held immense potential, the intricate webs of logistics, maintenance, and human error could swiftly undo the advantages offered by machinery. The Tiger tank's design philosophy was inherently linked to the German military's emphasis on a strategy often termed blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This involved rapid mechanized assaults intended to disrupt and demoralize the enemy defense before they could mount a coherent response. However, as the vast expanses of the Soviet landscape lay before them, the assumptions surrounding the Tiger's operational expectations came undone with brutal haste. The ambitious German commanders believed that their cutting-edge machinery would maintain mobility even when deployed in extreme conditions. Yet the largely untested gearbox of the Tiger created catastrophic vulnerabilities, often failing spectacularly after merely 50 kilometers, rendering crews immobilized and exposed in hostile territory. In the icy grip of the Russian winter, the Tiger I's flaws were cast into harsh relief. The freezing temperatures proved to be the bane of its mechanical systems. Lubricants thickened, and gears ground ominously beneath the weight of the sub-zero conditions. Cumbersome logistics meant that replacement parts were not readily available, or in many cases, entirely absent. When a crew encountered a disabled Tiger, a formidable shell of its intended purpose, waves of frustration surged through their ranks. Soldiers, trained to rely on their machine as an extension of their will, faced the grim prospect of becoming mere targets. Amidst this maneuver warfare paradigm, the overwhelming Soviet response, known as deep battle doctrine, played to their strengths. Soviet forces embodied tactics forged in the crucible of brutal conflict, where a relentless ability to adapt became their central tenet. Commanders like Georgy Zhukov orchestrated multi-layered offensives that involved a combination of infantry, artillery, and armored units that could envelop the German positions. The encirclement tactics employed by the Red Army not only upended the expectations of German supremacy, but also elicited a fierce psychological response. Troops found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered, beset by waves of resilient Soviet infantry and mechanized units that coordinated efforts to exploit the vulnerabilities of German vehicles. An emblematic battle during this period was the ferocious engagement at Kursk in July 1943, where the Germans sought to reclaim their aura of invincibility amidst Stalin's determined counteroffensives. As the massive clash unfolded, Tiger tanks were pushed to their limits. The shock of their advanced armor was muted against a backdrop of sheer numbers and evolving tactics employed by the Soviet generals. With each hour ticking away like a metronome of despair, it became apparent that the excessive pride in technological prowess was met head-on by a deeply entrenched enemy unfazed by early German victories. The unfortunate reality that surfaced was that the crews found themselves in machines that, while intimidating and lethal in certain contexts, now presented themselves as liabilities, their advanced systems subject to failure in the chaos of war. Furthermore, the impact of the Tiger's limitations rippled through the ranks, causing friction and unrest among the men who depended on these colossal beasts. The stories emerging from tank crews reflected a visceral connection to the lives of those both inside and outside their hulking machines. As Tiger crews navigated through the relentless Russian terrain, they faced a duality of existence, one of proud warriors fighting at the vanguard of military innovation, and another of men burdened by anxiety, crushed by the weight of mechanical failures and the driving brutality of the conflict. The fallout resulted in not just failed missions, but also a profound psychological toll, wherein the hopes once vested in these mechanical monoliths turned to whispers of anonymity, fraught with the tension of endeavor against overwhelming odds. Logistically, the situation became even more dire as the theater of war stretched from the lush steppes of Ukraine to the arid wastelands of Stalingrad. The demands placed upon the Wehrmacht are best understood through an analysis of supply chains, the arteries of war that nourished combat effectiveness. Fuel supplies dwindled, maintenance capabilities faltered, and reliable transportation for logistics became a perpetual quagmire. The Tiger tank, despite its initial reputation, fell prey to the very strategy it was meant to epitomize. Blitzkrieg's rapid pace became an enemy of its own, and what served as a symbol of technological innovation soon transformed into a relic of a rapidly diminishing Wehrmacht. The paradox of these grand machines of war crystallized painfully. Built to dominate yet hindered by their complexity, they reflected the tragic irony of a military caught in a whirlpool of its technologically ambitious aspirations, sabotaged by the realities of modern warfare. As the Tiger's image morphed from a beacon of hope to a constraining liability, the haunting litany of human sacrifice added a further layer of somber reality to warfare. The crew members, often mere boys thrust into the maelstrom of war, bore witness to ceaseless combat, facing not only the enemy's fire, but the harrowing indignity of being left unsupported amid mechanical breakdowns. Each instance of failure carried the weight of lives lost, missions aborted, and the crumbling integrity of the once feared German armored divisions. The psychological scars inflicted by the war, intertwined with the Tiger's faulty mechanics, painted a vivid picture of a generation forgotten amid the overtowering ambition of their leaders, a testament to the unsung and unyielding spirit of the common soldier forging on against insurmountable odds, all while encased in machinery that couldn't always carry them to victory. Ultimately, the operational history of the Tiger I tank serves as a window into the broader dynamics of the Eastern Front, a narrative entrenched in pride and the subsequent debunking of myth. The stoic echoes of metal clashing amid blaring horns of despair and resolute determination reverberate through the chronicles of World War II, capturing a timely lesson in the relationship between man and machine, and the intricate dance of strategy against tenacity. This tension between technological promise and the gritty, often brutal realities of war underlines the tragic dichotomy of ambition and the humanity that fuels warfare itself, reminding us that to understand the full scope of such a conflict, one must delve not just into tanks and artillery, but into the very essence of the men who drove them into battle, cherishing every fleeting moment of courage amid the uncertainties of fate. As the sun began to rise over the Eastern Front, illuminating the stark realities of war, the formidable sight of the Tiger I tank stood stark against the horizon, its 80mm gun a symbol of German military prowess, yet its technical shortcomings rendered it a double-edged sword. Designed specifically for tank engagements, the Tiger was an engineering marvel, boasting resilient armor that was nearly impervious to the standard rounds used by the Soviet T-34s. However, the inherent complexity of its design often proved detrimental under the relentless demands of the battlefield. German commanders, initially bewitched by its capabilities, soon found themselves grappling with its glaring vulnerabilities. Amongst these was the Achilles heel of the Tiger, the gearbox, whose frailties turned long-desired dominance into disarray. It became common to hear reports from the front lines of tanks immobilized after mere kilometers due to stripped gears and failures within their transmission systems. Operationally, the Tiger's deployment reflected the broader German strategy of blitzkrieg, characterized by speed, coordination, and decisive assaults. However, the realities of war dictated that such momentum was often stifled by logistical foul-ups and the mechanical blunders that plagued one of Hitler's prized beasts in combat. As company commanders deployed their Tigers into the fray, the intention was clear: to exploit and overwhelm Soviet positions through sheer firepower. Yet the effectiveness of these tactics was often compromised by the requirement for extensive logistical support, not just in terms of fuel and ammunition, but for spare parts and technical personnel adept at resolving mechanical failures. The Tigers, once symbols of invincibility, now often stood as monuments to the limitations of engineering genius when faced with the brutal requirements of ongoing conflicts. The focal point of combat was frequently the pivotal city of Stalingrad, where the importance of armored units became ever more pronounced. Here the Tigers were expected to breach Soviet defenses and facilitate the encirclement of enemy troops, a calculative strategy aimed at delivering a swift victory that had eluded German forces in previous engagements. However, the dedication of Soviet forces proved far more formidable than anticipated. The geography of the urban landscape marginalized the advantages offered by the Tiger's firepower and armor, forcing crews into tight engagements where superior maneuverability, a significant trait of the T-34, became paramount. Furthermore, the psychological impact on the crew was profound. Many were acutely aware that their survivability hinged not only on the performance of their tank, but also on the reliability or failure of its components. These stresses manifested as tension within the ranks, leading to split-second decision-making that sometimes favored audacity in the hope of survival despite the overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Among the soldiers who operated the Tigers, the duality of their reality was stark. For many young men thrust into battle, there was an exhilarating sense of pride in commanding such a formidable machine. Yet, they were also acutely cognizant of its limitations. Stories abounded within tank crews, both those who triumphed and those who fell prey to the relentless Soviet onslaught, amplifying a narrative of bravery amidst adversity and disillusionment amid mechanical failure. The grim truth of the battlefield stood aloof as the renowned power of the Tiger, its devastating cannon and fortified exterior, became overshadowed by its mechanical flaws. The polarized experience of hope and despair was felt painfully, as they were not simply fighting against enemy forces, but also against the very workings of their own war machines, joined in a tragic embrace with the specter of malfunction. The decision-making by German high command did not escape scrutiny, especially as reports poured into their operational centers, highlighting the staggering 50% failure rate of Tiger transmissions at critical junctures in the fighting. Questions about tactical preferences were raised as engineers struggled to balance the tank's legendary offensive capabilities against the mechanical reliability that had faltered at the precipice of major engagements. The stakes escalated as another massive offensive was planned, dubbed Operation Citadel, an ambitious project aimed at decisively crippling Soviet forces in the Kursk salient. With miscalculations from command compounding the existing mechanical vulnerabilities, the decision to allocate more resources toward deploying the massive Tiger units, despite dwindling support for repairs and maintenance, made the campaign a complex gamble. The repercussions were felt deeply in the cold, calculated battles that took place in the sweltering summer heat of 1943. As experienced crews engaged the Soviet defenses, the initial bursts of confidence quickly dwindled into despair, with tank after tank succumbing to breakage mid-battle. Time and again, The sounds of splintering metal were accompanied by the echoes of frustrated young soldiers grappling with mechanical failures that turned moments of bravery into potential death traps. The mechanical limits became a rite of passage and trauma, with the camaraderie between crew members solidifying, yet imbued with an ever-present anxiety as they traversed their ill-fated odyssey. Instances of heroism emerged, with crews refusing to abandon their machinery, battling to make the impossible repairs under fire, defying the odds despite knowing their heavy calipers were less reliable than initially recruited. As the Eastern Front continued spiraling into chaos, with the Axis forces on the retreat and their mechanical resources depleting rapidly, it became clear that the ambitions behind the Tiger I tank had come with heavy costs, both in terms of lives and materials. The disparity between the initial awe surrounding this armored giant and the somber reality of its service life hinted at a larger narrative of human tenacity against a backdrop of catastrophic failure. The stark lessons of the Tiger tank's journey diligently unfolded, a reminder of the frailty nested within the epic machinery of war. And as the echoes of battle faded into the distance, the remnants of once mighty Tigers were left stranded across the bloodied landscapes of Europe, a silent witness to the enduring conflict between man's aspirations and the unforgiving theater of war, a profound legacy overshadowed by failure, yet steeped in the unyielding spirit of those who fought desperately to make it functional, embodying resilience amidst dangers unimagined. In the summer of 1943, amidst the relentless heat suffocating the Eastern Front, the German Tiger I tank stood as a monument to advanced military engineering. With its formidable 88mm gun and almost impenetrable armor, it promised to change the tide of armored warfare. However, the initial victories procured by these mechanical beasts quickly led to a sobering realization among their crews. The Tiger's engineering marvel was only skin deep. Problems with the gearbox, compounded by the overwhelming weight of the vehicle, transformed the Tiger I from a symbol of power into a risk-laden investment. Military leaders pitted their faith against an unforgiving reality that retreated with them into the depths of their despair. The German army's loss of mobility on the battlefield due to these technical malfunctions brought into focus a catastrophic flaw in their operational planning. As officers and commanders observed, the heavy machinery they had placed such faith in became less reliable under the stress of combat. The primary concern was not merely the losses sustained from enemy fire, but from the self-inflicted wounds caused by machinery that could succumb to wear and tear after a mere 50 kilometers of arduous engagement. When one examined battle reports from that summer, a grim pattern emerged. Tiger crews often reported mechanical failures exacerbated by the grueling conditions. Overheated engines, seized gearboxes, and countless maintenance snafus began to dominate the narratives of heroically fought battles. Significant gains achieved during coordinated assaults turned into frantic retreats, as the once mighty Tigers succumbed to immobilization, their heroic facades shattered by unforgiving machinations within the intricacies of their design. In this unforgiving environment, the bonds between tank crews intensified as they collectively faced their uncertainties. Amid the chaotic roar of artillery and the acrid scent of smoke, necessity forged a spirit of ingenuity and shared sacrifice. Crews of the Tiger I, fully cognizant of the burdens hoisted upon them, scrambled to devise makeshift repairs under the pressure of enemy fire. Experienced gunners recounted moments when the internal combustion of the vehicle engine emitted louder, ominous growls mirroring their sinking morale, as if the very machine they relied upon was announcing impending doom. The crews learned quickly to strategize differently, prioritizing communications with fellow units to prevent becoming isolated against waves of Soviet armored formations. Their tactics morphed into a duality of offense and preservation, where survival often overshadowed the pursuit of glory. As the engagements continued, the German command's reliance on the Tiger's performance reflected a miscalculation of logistics and tactical mobility. The supply lines, stretched thin, struggled to deliver replacement parts and maintenance crews to the front lines, exacerbating the woes faced by the beleaguered crews. The Tigers, with their capacity for destruction, were rendered immobile relics amidst the fluid battlefield where speed became a crucial factor. Supporting infantry and more mobile tanks like the Panzer III found themselves burdened as frontline soldiers were forced to guard against the perils of enemy advances which they were ill-equipped to fend off while tethered to their ailing comrades. Recovery operations frequently missed deadlines, leaving tanks stuck in perilous positions when a quick retreat was essential. The logistical chain broke down into a dystopian scenario of armored warfare, where machine and man were left to grapple with their intertwining fates. In the wake of these struggles, the morale of the troops sagged as they watched their once breathtaking advantage evaporate. The battlefield gradually became lined with incapacitated tigers, vast metal carcasses marking the detention points of the countless failed rescues they attempted. Each burnt-out tank became a testament to a larger narrative of aspiration and collapse. Crews told stories of comrades who survived the battle only to perish, as the consequences of maintaining an unreliable vehicle shadowed them in their daily lives, chasing after ever-fleeting victories. The shared hardships and losses carved deeper scars on their psyches than many of the physical injuries they sustained. The Tiger's mechanical limitations also led to engaging anecdotes among the infantry soldiers, who often looked on in envy and frustration. A once celebrated sisterhood of machines, their reputation muddled with failures, turned into a source of anxious humor in an effort to cope with the grim reality of war, that the awe-inspiring Tiger would ultimately let them down. The doctrine behind its deployment fell apart under examination. Initially revered as harbingers of swift change, the very machines meant to usher in a new paradigm of warfare instead conjured feelings of dread among those tasked with wielding their complex might. Chosen for rapid infiltration, they fell victim to the organizational lag in tactical speed they were supposed to embody. Yet, the indomitable human spirit stood alongside these crumbling titans, imbuing each operation with a sense of purpose. Small victories were wrestled from inevitable defeat, as crews managed to patch together mechanical remnants, often modifying their approaches to include modifications based on battlefield experiences. The training revolutionized their operations even as the tank's machinery succumbed to disrepair. Improvisation became an art form reminiscent of desperation. They emerged from under the domed roofs of the tanks that had served them, a new generation of soldiers molded not only by tools of war, but by the bitter lessons of reliance and trust. The Eastern Front in 1943 epitomized a shift not merely in combat, but also within the hearts and minds of those engaged in this theater of war. Those who once placed unflinching faith in machinery began to clarify their understanding of this unforgiving environment. It demanded that men outmaneuver their fears, adapt to their circumstances, and prop each other up amid potential catastrophe. The desperate need for lasting connections in an unrelenting cacophony forged a unique empathy that reached far beyond the metallic confines of the Tiger Y. It was a brutal reminder of man and machine, their connections frayed, yet somehow intertwined, illustrating the broader consequences of warfare in the gears of history. Ultimately, the plight of each Tiger would become woven into the greater fabric of wartime experiences, shaping the narrative of human resilience against the backdrop of machinery that barely met the expectations set upon it. A testament, perhaps, to the hope propelled by brass and steel while simultaneously crumbling beneath it. As the German army pushed deeper into Soviet territory in 1943, the Tiger tank's commanding presence on the battlefield clashed with the stark realities of its mechanical frailty. Initially conceived as an answer to the Allies' armor, the Tiger Y marked a radical departure from previous tank designs, with its formidable 88mm gun and revolutionary sloped armor. However, mere months into its deployment, military commanders faced an unsettling paradox. The very vehicle that instilled fear in their enemies was also rapidly succumbing to a myriad of mechanical failures. These failures did not merely plague the tanks themselves. They echoed through the ranks of their operators, infusing every skirmish with a creeping dread that hung over even the most intrepid of commanders. In the calculated chaos of Operation Citadel, Launched in July 1943, Tiger tanks were critical assets for the Wehrmacht, expected to breach defensive lines and provide a strategic advantage. However, the realities of combat were relentless. The terrain, pockmarked with shell craters and rubble from relentless artillery shelling, played havoc on the intricate transmission systems that were already known to be delicate. The Tigers, while possessing exceptional armor that could withstand direct hits from Soviet artillery, were now tragically burdened by their own technology. Many crews quickly learned that their prized machines could not endure the grueling demands of sustained combat operations, often breaking down after just 50 kilometers. This inherent flaw became an insurmountable obstacle during critical operations, transforming advances into retreats and turning victories into Pyrrhic ones. Strategically, the Wehrmacht's tactics had shifted from traditional frontal assaults to more sophisticated maneuvers that required tanks, including the Tiger, to advance quickly and efficiently in coordination with infantry. However, the slow and burdensome weight of the Tiger became its Achilles heel, as crews struggled to maintain momentum in the face of mechanical failures that turned rapid movements into drawn-out engagements. What should have been synergistic advances were instead marred by the need for constant repairs, creating gaps in the lines that Allied forces were quick to exploit. As suggested by multiple accounts from tank commanders, the frenetic pace of Soviet counteroffensives further exploited these vulnerabilities. The famous Soviet T-34, with its lower profile and better maneuverability, often outflanked the bulky Tigers, catching infantry units off guard and sowing further discord within the German ranks. These tactical failures were compounded by severe supply chain issues, as extensive commitments on multiple fronts meant that spare parts for the Tiger were often scarce. The complex drivetrain required to harness its power was notoriously difficult to maintain. Often, the spare parts arrived months too late, and units were left scrambling to keep even a single tank operational. As reports filtered back to command, this logistical nightmare triggered an assessment of the relationship between operational theory and battlefield reality, a disarray that lengthened supply lines and strained unit cohesion beyond limits. Diaries and letters from soldiers in the field during this grim period highlighted a disillusionment that was deepening. There was a pervading sense that the beast they were ordered to trust had betrayed them at a time when unity was paramount. Interpersonal dynamics among the tank crews took on essential significance as their faith in their machines dwindled. While initially filled with the fervor of new technology, they soon found the essence of their survival lay not in mechanized might, but in their enduring camaraderie. Not infrequently, crews devised makeshift solutions and adaptations, cobbling together equipment in a desperate but ingenious display of adaptability. This resourcefulness became a necessary mantra. As tanks fell under enemy fire, operators coordinated their actions, learning how to exploit the strengths of their neighbors. Platoons evolved into close-knit units that relied upon the individual's skill and collective spirit, forming bonds that could withstand even the most harrowing circumstances. Within the metal confines of the Tiger tank, humanity flourished. Shared stories and laughter served as a balm to the relentless terror outside. As summer gave way to the bitter frost of autumn, the tide of battle took a noticeable shift. The Battle of Kursk, fought in fierce hand-to-hand combat amid frigid temperatures, produced substantial losses on both sides, revealing the limitations of not just the Tiger, but also the broader strategic framework of the German command. The sheer size and length of the conflict exposed deficiencies in planning. The logistical complications became evident as fuel supplies dwindled and weather conditions deteriorated. The operational tempo ground to a halt. Despite the symbolic grandeur of the Tigers, their limitations exerted a warning echo that reverberated through the ranks. As the legacy of the Tiger I moved beyond the tactical failures, it effervesced into a narrative of human resilience and adaptation under pressure. In those moments when failures felt insurmountable, men emerged, embodying an indefatigable spirit that sought to overcome their circumstances, often through sheer camaraderie. The tank crews articulated their woes and frustrations through increasingly vivid depictions in letters home, expressing not just the losses to machinery but, more heartbreakingly, losses of brotherhood and trust in a cause that appeared ever more futile. The emotional scars ran deep. They were not only combatants, but witnesses to the tragedy of mechanized warfare. In retrospect, the operational challenges faced by the German Tiger tank crews served as a critical lens through which the horrors of war were exposed. The technological marvel that was meant to encapsulate supremacy in armored warfare devolved into a symbol of torn expectations and broken trust. In the end, this conflation of human and machine, their intertwined fates, culminated in a poignant chapter of World War II. Thus, the Tiger I, with its legendary status, became irrevocably tied to the profound human tragedies of the Eastern Front, ultimately serving as a chilling manifestation of the war's many contradictions: technological superiority against human frailty, ambition met with disillusionment, and glory amid chaos, marking an era irreversibly reshaped by the clangor of steel and the sorrow of those who fought.